Pompeii did not wake up as a tragedy. It woke up as a city. Its streets were still there, its shops still opened, its courtyards still caught the morning light. People still stepped into the day expecting work, routine, trade, meals, conversations, and small, ordinary tasks. Nothing in that first rhythm of life would have felt like an ending. That is what makes Pompeii so haunting. The city we remember as a disaster was, only hours earlier, still alive in the most ordinary way. Bakers prepared bread, merchants arranged goods, servants crossed courtyards, doors opened onto familiar streets, water moved through fountains, voices carried through stone roads warmed by the sun. And above it all stood the mountain, not yet as a symbol of destruction, not yet as the force that would bury the city, just part of the landscape, part of the horizon, part of the world people had learned to live beside. That morning, Pompeii was still full of habit, still full of motion, still full of people who believed the day belonged to them. But the terrible power of history is that it does not always announce itself. Sometimes the end of a world begins in the middle of an ordinary day, and Pompeii may be the clearest example of that. To understand what was lost here, we should not begin with ash. We should begin with life, with the streets, with the homes, with the voices, with the city as it still was, just before everything changed. So before the sky darkened, before panic spread, and before Pompeii became a ruin, it was first a place of light, color, movement, and morning routine. In the morning, Pompeii could feel open, bright, and orderly. Sunlight entered the city across rooftops, walls, courtyards, and paved streets. The buildings were close enough to create intimacy, but the city did not feel cramped in the way many later cities would. There was air here, stone, color, painted walls, open entrances, water, a sense of design shaped by Roman life. Pompeii was not a remote outpost. It was a thriving town connected to trade, agriculture, status, and the wider Roman world. Its streets were built for movement, its houses reflected wealth in different degrees, its public spaces carried the confidence of a place that expected continuity. The city had rhythm. Fountains offered water at street level. Shops opened onto the roads. Doorways revealed glimpses of private interiors. Carts had worn grooves into the stone. Small shrines, walls, courtyards, and public buildings all existed within a city people knew deeply through repetition. To walk through Pompeii that morning would not have felt like walking through history. It would have felt like walking through someone's present. That is the most important thing to remember. For us, Pompeii is frozen. For them, it was moving. It was not yet a memory. It was still a functioning city full of plans for the rest of the day. And the best place to feel that living rhythm was not from above, but down at street level, where the city spoke through footsteps, trade, routine, and human movement. At street level, Pompeii was practical before it was dramatic. People moved through the city with purpose. Shopkeepers opened their fronts to the road. Goods were set out. Bread, wine, oil, fruit, cloth, tools, and small daily necessities passed from hand to hand. Workers prepared for another day. Buyers stopped to inspect, ask, compare, and move on. The streets were not silent ruins. They were active spaces. Some were busy and direct. Others were quieter, shaped by shade, stone walls, and passing footsteps. You could sense the difference between a street built for traffic, a corner used for trade, and a more private stretch leading toward homes and courtyards. Life happened close to the road. That was part of Pompeii's character. Public and private space often touched each other. A doorway could open from a street into a house of surprising elegance. A shop could sit beside a more refined residence. A working day and a domestic day could unfold only steps apart. And everywhere there was routine. Someone carrying food, someone cleaning a threshold, someone preparing tools, someone talking in the street before moving on. Someone already thinking about the next errand, the next sale, the next delivery, the next meal. This is what gives Pompeii its strange emotional power. The city does not feel distant because it was not built only from monuments. It was built from repeated human actions, not from one grand moment, but from thousands of ordinary ones. But a city is never only its streets. Behind the shop fronts and stone roads, another layer of Pompeii existed, quieter, more intimate, and deeply human. Behind the outer walls of Pompeii, daily life became more private and more personal. Many homes opened inward. From the street, a building could appear modest, but inside, it might reveal a courtyard, a pool of light, painted walls, columns, household objects, and a carefully ordered domestic space. These interiors were not only practical, they expressed status, taste, and rhythm. This was where the city softened. Outside, people moved through trade, errands, and noise. Inside, life followed other patterns. Food was prepared, rooms were tended, water was used, spaces were cleaned, instructions were given. Household routines continued with the calm repetition of a world that expected tomorrow to come. That expectation matters, because history becomes more painful when we remember that people were not living toward disaster. They were living toward the next ordinary thing, the next meal, the next conversation, the next household task, the next visitor, the next hour. Pompeii at this level was not only Roman, it was deeply familiar, not because the objects were modern, they were not, but because the structure of life still feels recognizable. The home is a place of order, the courtyard is a place of light, the household as a world within the city. And that is what makes the loss here feel so immediate across time. Yet Pompeii was not only intimate and domestic, it was also a town shaped by prosperity, display, and the wider confidence of Roman civilization. Pompeii was not a poor town waiting for history to notice it. It was a prosperous place, and signs of that prosperity appeared in architecture, decoration, gardens, objects, and social behavior. Some houses were larger, more elaborate, and clearly designed to impress. Wall paintings, interior layouts, and cultivated spaces reflected the habits of people who understood status and wanted it to be seen. This mattered because Pompeii belonged to a bigger world. It was Roman in its structure, Roman in its aspirations, and Roman in its sense of public and private image. Wealth here was not only about comfort, it was also about visibility, about belonging to a social order, about presenting refinement, stability, and place. Even in a relatively small city, there were differences. Some lived with more beauty around them. Some had more servants. Some had access to more space, more influence, more display. But all of them lived under the same sky. And that detail becomes more powerful the longer we stay with the city. Because beneath these visible differences, Pompeii still shared one urban reality, one streetscape, one rhythm, one mountain overlooking the same day. That unity is part of what gives the city its tragic shape. Rich and poor did not experience Pompeii in the same way. But when the day turned, the city turned with them all. And still, even in that prosperous world, the signs that mattered most were the ones people did not fully understand: the heat, the stillness, the mountain, and the quiet warnings that had become too familiar to fear. By this point in the story, we can feel the city clearly enough for a new question to emerge. What, if anything, was already wrong? The answer is unsettling because it is not simple. Pompeii had lived for years in the shadow of Vesuvius. The mountain was present, but presence is not the same as warning. People adapt to landscapes. They normalize what stands over them. They fold risk into routine until it no longer feels like risk at all. That may have been true here. The air may have felt heavy. The day may have felt warmer, stranger, less stable in ways that were easy to dismiss. There may have been small disturbances, small signals, small discomforts that did not yet arrange themselves into a clear meaning. This is often how disaster lives before it arrives, not as certainty, not as announcement, but as scattered details that remain just below the level of action. And daily life is powerful enough to cover them. A city can keep buying, selling, cooking, cleaning, speaking, and moving, even while something larger gathers beyond it. That is not ignorance. It is the ordinary human instinct to continue with the visible day rather than surrender to an unseen threat. Pompeii was still doing exactly that. The mountain was still there. The city was still alive. The routine was still stronger than fear. For a little longer. And that is what makes the next stretch of time so painful to imagine, because the city did not stop. It continued. It moved forward into what felt like ordinary hours. The last ordinary hours are always the hardest to look at, not because they are dramatic, but because they are not. Pompeii kept going. People still crossed the streets. Work still continued. Conversations still happened in passing. Doors still opened and closed. Food was still handled, carried, served, prepared. The city still sounded like itself. That is what turns this story from history into something almost unbearable. Nothing in ordinary life knows it is about to become precious. No one says, "This is the last familiar walk." No one says, "This is the last market exchange." No one says, "This is the last quiet household task before the world breaks open." The value of an ordinary hour only becomes visible when it is gone. And Pompeii gives us that realization more clearly than almost any other place in history. Because so much of its daily world was sealed, interrupted, and preserved at the edge of destruction. Not enough to save life, but enough to leave us facing the shape of it. This was a city still inside its own routine, still reaching toward the next hour, still unaware that the next hour would not belong to it. Then the day changed, not gradually in the human sense, but decisively enough that routine could no longer protect the city from what was coming. At some point, the ordinary pattern could no longer hold. The sky changed, light changed, air changed. What had been background became impossible to ignore. Ash began to fall. Smoke and debris altered the city's relationship to space, visibility, and time itself. The familiar world became unstable. Streets that had carried trade and routine now carried confusion. People looked upward. People hesitated. People tried to read what was happening while already standing inside it. This is the moment when a city stops being ordinary, even if it has not yet fully understood its fate. And that break matters, because catastrophe is not only destruction, it is also disorientation, the sudden collapse of normal meaning. The moment when the things around you are still physically present, but no longer behave like the world you knew when the day began. Pompeii crossed that threshold fast. The mountain was no longer part of the horizon. It had become the story. And the city, which only hours earlier had felt settled, structured, and alive, was now entering a reality it could not control. From that moment on, the question was no longer whether Pompeii would return to normal, but whether the living city that morning had already been lost. When we think of Pompeii now, we often think of ash, ruins, silence, and the strange stillness of a city interrupted. But that is not where Pompeii began. It began as a living place, a place of streets and thresholds, a place of fountains and courtyards, a place of trade, work, meals, status, routine, and private life. A place where the day began like any other day because the people inside it still belonged to the world they knew. That is what the eruption destroyed. Not only buildings, not only walls, not only a Roman town near a volcano. It destroyed an ordinary day that had not yet finished becoming itself. And that is why Pompeii continues to affect us so deeply. Because it does not show us only death. It shows us life caught just before disappearance. A city still speaking, still moving, still expecting tomorrow. And then, suddenly, no longer able to reach it. If we remember Pompeii only as a ruin, we remember too little. To truly understand it, we have to remember the last ordinary day. The light, the voices, the errands, the meals, the open doors. The city before it knew its name would become history.